Welcome to this panel. We have a very distinguished panel here. To my immediate left is Andrew Martin, Executive Vice President of Cascale. To his left is Riaz Hamidullah, Additional Foreign Secretary, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. To his left, Mr. Mohammed Alauddin, Rector, Bangladesh Power Management Institute. And at the other end, Mohammed Ziaul Haq, Director, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. My name is Sarosh Kuruvilla. I'm a professor at Cornell University, and I'm happy to be here and moderating this panel. Unlike whatever we heard this morning, which is all about mitigation, this is about adaptation, about Bangladeshi profits, exports, and Bangladeshi workers in the ready-made garment industry. So I wanted to share a few slides just to set the stage, and then we will have our panelists react to some of those presentations. We have the slides, please. Can we have the slides? Wrong slide. I can't see it. Sorry, we are waiting for the slides. Okay, so the big issues about adaptation. We have looked, as you all know, the world is getting hotter. And most of the big apparel production centers in the world are in very hot countries that are getting even hotter. So what this slide shows is that the number of days during which wet bulb globe temperatures, that is heat and humidity, exceed 30 degrees centigrade is increasing. In Dhaka, it's going to be about 84 days by 2030, and by 2050, it'll be 120 days. Karachi is even hotter than that. Now, wet bulb globe temperatures of 30.5 and above generally require that workers work for 1 hour and rest for half an hour. Work for 1 hour, rest for half an hour, if you want to maintain their health and productivity. Okay, so that's about heat and humidity. And Bangladesh is just behind Karachi in terms of the negative effects on this. Indoor temperature measurements is not common. Cambodia measures temperatures in each of the factories. Vietnam measures temperature in each of the factories. Bangladesh, we don't measure the temperature at all. People notice a decline in productivity on very hot days, but they don't necessarily link that productivity decline to heat and measure. So it's really important to measure in each factory temperature in different locations. These figures are about flooding. The top is on river flooding in terms of coastal flooding, and you can sort of see on the left side is flooding in terms of 2030. On the right is 2050. All the black dots are garment factories. The bottom two panels are about riverine flooding. And on the left side is 2030, on the right side is 2050. By 2050, a significant number of garment factories in this country will experience severe flooding. And enough to close down production for, for several days, if not several days, several weeks. So that's and we have the data to sort of tell you this factory on this street will get flooded, but this factory on this street will not get flooded because of the lay of the land and the gradient and so on and so forth. So we can get very, very specific. These slides talk about the economic damage, and I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but for each of these 4 centers, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Cambodia, and Vietnam, we're talking about billions of dollars in terms of productivity loss, production loss, export loss, foreign exchange earnings loss, and so on and so forth. And this is in the report, which is available publicly on our website. The employment, so the flooding effects at home, affect workers' lives in several ways. They can't get to work. They can't, so they lose income. There's sickness. So then factories get absenteeism. They lose production, so on and so forth. When we talked with factory managers, most factory managers said, no, heat is not a problem. They understand flooding is a problem, but they don't understand heat is not a problem. But heat is actually the bigger problem, and it's a consistent long-term problem. So that's what our research shows, and we are hoping that policymakers will start asking factories to measure temperature, link temperature to productivity so that you can make the calculations about how much you want to invest in cooling factories, and that investment has to be passive rather than active, otherwise your carbon footprint grows up. See, these are complicated calculations, but you can't make those calculations until you get appropriate data. So this requires a concerted effort. Governments, private sector, unions and workers have to work together in order to sort of, reduce the burden on workers, but also to improve the productivity and profits of the factories. So I'm going to stop there. Sorry you couldn't see the slides very closely. But my first question is to Andrew Martin. Cascale is a leader in the apparel industry with its focus on collective action in climate and decent work. So adaptation needs would be important to Cascale's strategy as well as cross-cutting both working pillars. So can you tell us why adaptation would be an industry priority for both brands and manufacturers, including its relationship to key legislation in the EU, such as CSDDD, and the focus on working conditions and grievances?
Super. Is this working or not? This one? No. Can you hear me? Good, okay. Thank you very much, Sarosh. I think actually what I would start with, if you want to read a good answer to that question, read the higher ground reports because they do actually cover it. I'm going to quote, before I get into this, 2 comments from keynote speakers this morning. Why have keynote speakers unless you get to quote them? Mustafiz, in his opening this morning, very simply said, climate action is a business opportunity. Lutfi Siddiqui, Special Envoy, said, you should treat climate action not as a compliance matter, but as a business strategy issue. The reason I put it in that context in relation to climate mitigation, adaptation, and resilience is it's essential for businesses, both brands and retailers and manufacturers, to start seeing this from the business case perspective. And I think if we don't do that, we're never going to get the buy-in and the urgency and the commitment to do the things that are needed. We're doing a lot of work. So just for those of you who don't know, Cascale, because it may still be new to some of you, Cascale formerly was the Sustainable Apparel Coalition. We are a business association, but we do have as members brands and retailers, manufacturers, and a group of non-profit NGOs, academia. So we represent the whole value chain. The reason I think this is an important issue for business is that they need to see it as a business imperative. I actually am starting to think about this in the context of we need to move beyond sustainability aspirations to business imperatives. We need to move away from voluntary targets to business operations. And that's true whether that's in decarbonising or in mitigation and in adaptation. And so I think there's huge opportunity for business to start to look at, both from a manufacturer perspective and a brand perspective, as to how you look at these issues and address them in the context of other targets, in the context of decarbonisation. I mean, a lot of brands are talking about decarbonisation, but actually, how can you look at a strategy that also recognises the opportunities and the risks that you have? If you don't address the issues of adaptation, then there's an issue with your supply chain. There's an issue with the value that you can get. There's an issue that's for both the brands and the manufacturers. So I think really treating this as a business context is really important. And if I could just sort of close on this, I've just spent the last 4 weeks in Asia, I've done 5 countries. I've met with 20 manufacturers. I've met with 10 CEOs from the manufacturers. And I have to say that there is an overwhelming buy-in and commitment to this concept of shifting our thinking from just sustainability as a passion and a commitment to actually being a business imperative. And for us, that also means, in terms of taking this forward, shifting the discussions from sustainability professionals to supply chain professionals within the industry, to CEOs in companies to start to recognize. And what I think is helping us with this, you mentioned at the end there, the regulation, is I think the regulation is actually a good way of giving us both a lens and a spotlight on these issues, and also a really good platform from which to develop new strategies.
Thank you. It's useful to know that CSDDD specifically requires that companies and their supply chains and all their business relationships do not cause harm to planet 2. So that's the key connection here. My next question...
That's a huge risk for business if you don't address that.
Yes, it's a huge risk for business. So, much of the discussion about mitigation is coming down from the supply chain, from EU regulations. And my question to Mr. Riaz Hamidullah, sorry to put you on the spot here like this, is how can the Ministry of Foreign Affairs ensure that climate adaptation and resilience are integrated into Bangladesh's international trade policies, so that, particularly in sectors like the apparel industry?
I think since morning I've been here, and as I listen, and since we have to talk about #climate action, it's not simply limited to manufacturing, it's not simply limited to RMG. So I would rather keep in slight deference to your question if I come back to a couple of elephants which are still unattended in the room. First, I think the point which came from the inaugural plenary was how do we get the economics of climate action right? And particularly, at the heart to me is de-risking finance and investment. That is key. Because what you presented, and if you remember what was said in the morning, that what's happening in Florida, the insurance companies are going bankrupt, going to the roof. So increasingly where it's not, even 2025 or 2030, still they're not coming. If they don't come, how do they come, or how do we make them come? Related to that is the whole question of there's enough of technology, innovation and solutions, but they're not coming. I give a reference to UN Water Conference last year in March, and there was 700 plus commitments made, all related to private sector. Nothing will materialize. Why? And there's an integral to you, because we are talking of valuing water as well, but I haven't heard any reference to that. So I'll try to bring in the middle, because that would slightly relate to what you are asking. 2 things. One, let's just desegregate the whole manufacturing space and come to some solution orientation. And I ask everyone in the room, not only entrepreneurs, but also brands, please stand up to the challenge. Stand up to the challenge in terms of technology incubation. The word wasn't uttered a single time. Today, particularly those from Europe, I'm sure you'd bear with me, on the other side of the demand side, consumers and others are asking about the factory structures. I'm sure you'd bear with. What kind of rod to be used, cement to be used, what kind of building materials to be used. So next, what we are discussing beyond that, we'll come to that soon. Why not, in good time, we start talking about that? And this would not happen automatically, because if someone develops technology, that will be in his hand and that will be locked with IPR. Rather, if we can come to Bangladesh, pilot some bit, incubate technology, and create what Mustafi said, that it has to be a matter of shared responsibility, where both demand side and supply side, it has to be two to tango. If it doesn't happen, then we can be left in large. So the other point which I would really humbly put to you, I think there's another big elephant missed out. If you talk about climate action, if you talk about simply in context of apparel or manufacturing, I think that'll be wrong. There are three things to be addressed. Otherwise, we'll be missing the social pillar, big time. So smallholders in a country like Bangladesh, there are 2.5 billion people in the world who are missed out. And that's what European Union is talking about. We are talking also in the presence of informal economy. So that's also something we need to think about. And also there's no reference to SMEs. In an industry as this, SMEs has to be integral. Europe is enough experienced on that. I'll end with one point, which is again central and foundational, which is data. Data to be desegregated and data to be turned for good, for business. And if we do that, part of your question would also be addressed not simply for export, but also for domestic, because that would be inherently linked to the cost and improving that. I'll stop, but I'll be happy to take questions rather.
No, I think the point that you make about data is very, very crucial, because much of the sustainability discussion is occurring without looking at
what
data.
I'd rather challenge is that, you see, you for one or most of you in the room, there's enough of data being generated. Isn't it that each of the entrepreneurs can themselves monetize it, mining the data, their own data? Let them sit on the top of it. But I don't know, there's hardly any fact. And today with AI being on the round, so many of basic AI applications, I'm really wondering for some time, because we were in New York two weeks back, and Professor Yunus is saying the generative AI is, so we can employ just 101 of the AI and turn things for good, which I'm sure will be reflecting very wonderfully in the balance sheet of the manufacturers. But not a single one, you're talking of the basics, but that would go to climate action, that would be improving your business, that will be also de-risking the much of the risks that you have. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I think the issue about data is very interesting, because when we published this report about, we talked about the costs of not adapting to Bangladesh factories, Bangladesh exports, and of course the cost to Bangladesh workers. But we also got an investment firm to talk about the costs to the brands. And we found that not having climate adaptive policies affected brand profits. And so then we went to the investors, and the investors started asking the brands, what are you going to contribute to climate adaptation if you want to sort of protect your profits? So I think the kind of data that we can assemble and put to the public domain is really important to get people to be acting on these things. Data is easy, but not enough people act on the data that is already there. Okay, moving on. Question for Mr. Mohammed Alawuddin. Considering your experience in sustainable and renewable energy, how can Bangladesh accelerate its transition to renewable energy sources while also balancing the need for energy security and building the required human capital? To what extent is human capital a big issue for you?
Thank you for the pertinent question. So, as we have learned from the morning session that our renewable energy is only roughly 2% in the total power mix. Now the question is how to enhance the share of renewable energy in the power mix. So the first question is we have to explore the renewable resources. We need to have a comprehensive assessment of renewable resources in Bangladesh. So hopefully government has established a dedicated nodal agency for that. Sustainable and Renewable Energy Development Authority is entrusted with the responsibility of taking care of renewable energy and energy, which is both the twin pillars of sustainability. In Bangladesh, in fact, solar, wind, these are the major renewable energy sources, but when it comes to hydro, we have limited potential due to flat terrain of the country. And also we need to, as you've asked me, one question of human capital. Basically, the very nature of this technology is evolving nature, you know. That's why you need to keep update our workforce with this changing technology. This is one issue. Another is, say, we must look for the innovations so that the entrepreneurs can make viable business out of this. For example, say for solar application, Bangladesh excelled in terms of installing solar home system. Say it is now 6 million in number. But in fact, for bulk power generation, we do need huge land for that. This is a huge challenge. That's why we have to look for alternative application of solar. Let's say floating solar is one of the rooftop solar. And also another thing is, when we compare renewable energy with other energy, we are not considering the same footing. You see, I had one experience of attending another seminar with some bankers. They are telling that most of the money allotted for the renewable energy remains undisbursed. Why? They are saying that renewable energy is costly. The banker says. Why? They say that the coal or other fuels, although that is, they are cheaper. But when they say it cheaper, they don't consider the negative consequence, negative externalities of that project when they calculate the price into account. On the other hand, the solar power, their positive contribution or positive externalities are not taken into account while calculating the price of solar power. That's why it appears that solar power is costly. But as a matter of fact, it is not true. Once you calculate, considering the positive externalities, for example, once you install 50 kilowatt solar power plant on your rooftop, 50 kilowatt, in the 2 years' time, 20 years' time, they can, save your at least 20 ton fossil fuel equivalent. So these prices are not included while calculating this. This is one of the reasons for not escalating the solar power. Another point is, we must have business models. Somehow or other we have to come up with business model. Otherwise you cannot attract the private sectors. That's why as a head of a training institute, Bangladesh Power Management Institute, we are basically trying to update our engineers with state-of-the-art technologies, and also we are trying to show them the business model, how they can expand the solar power and renewable power, or in particular.
And what is the biggest challenge in educating or updating the knowledge of the engineers?
Because one thing I believe, since they are engineers, they have the primary ideas, of course, but they are not specialized in this. That's why we do need more pilots, more result demonstration, so that they can see for themselves and get confidence.
Thank you.
I can chip in. I'm sure that all the engineers in the room will sort of rebel. But one of the leading engineers of this country told me in one-liner, the engineers are increasingly risk-averse. They don't want to take up the CEO and other posts because he said, you do it, I don't want, they shy away.
And how do you solve that problem?
There's a word which is absolutely no-go, attitude. So I think we have to invest much earlier.
Thank you. So we have talked about mitigation in the morning and adaptation now, and my question to you, sir, is adaptation involves this concept of just transition, because we are worried not only about brand profits, factory profits, we're worried about workers' health and workers' earnings. What can you tell us about adaptation and just transition? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Professor Shinoz, and esteemed panelists and colleagues. Thank you again for having me in these important discussions. In fact, when you talk about the just transition, this issue has been has got the prominence in our discussions at national and international agenda. And at the same time, when we talk about the just transition, we try to include many things in the just transition pathways. Obviously, the just energy transition is one of them, but there are other elements, socioeconomic dimensions, other dimensions is very much involved in this process. And at the same time, adaptation, climate resilience is obviously within this just transition pathway. And being a sensible partner to the global community, we are trying to contribute to the process of achieving the Paris climate goal, both on adaptation and mitigation, climate resilience. But the point is that every country has its own nationally defined development priorities, and we have to consider them in a holistic manner. And in Bangladesh, we try to figure out how we can do in an effective fashion by preparing and developing some policy initiatives. We have NDC, Nationally Determined Contributions, we put forward in 2021, the updated one, and we are planning to have the next one in next year, 2025 NDC. At the same time, on adaptation, we have prepared a very comprehensive national adaptation plan. And in the plan, we try to point out the real situations on the ground by defining the most hotspot areas on climate change impacts. We identified 113 very specific interventions to deal with climate change negative impacts under 8 thematic areas and under 11 climate stress areas. So, and obviously one of the areas is urban setting, and most of the industries, the factories are located in urban settings. So we try to point out how the industry, they can be climate resilient. As you rightly pointed out in your presentation, that we have to face the flooding, the heat stress, and extreme events. So how we can deal with the industry, the factories, and how we can maintain the decent work, quality of job, and the other related issues can be minimized from the adverse impact of climate change. And on mitigation, my colleagues have rightfully pointed out that though the contribution to renewable energy is not very much, but we are putting a greater emphasis on increasing our renewable contribution, at the same time energy efficiency. And we know that from last COP, the global community has agreed to triple the capacity of renewable energy and double the energy efficiency at global scale and as well as national scale. So we are putting the greater emphasis on both the low emission development and as well as the climate resilience as much as we can in the light of our different national circumstances, and we already defined our national development priorities. So we have to be consistent in this way. But the fundamental point is that while we start in the process, we have already started in the process of just transition, but we have to make sure that they are inclusive, they are participatory, leaving no one behind. So this is the fundamental elements that we have to make sure at the end of the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up question. In your ministry, which is the Ministry of Environmental, Forest and Climate Change, when you look at your budgets, I like your plans, they're very good, but how are the budgets allocated? Is it more towards mitigation? Is it more towards adaptation? Do you have a sense of that?
Obviously, in terms of the proportional allocation, adaptation is greater than the mitigation allocation. But the point is that under the NAP, National Adaptation Plan, we have assessed that if you want to effectively implement the NAP throughout the process up to now 2050, it will require 230 billion US dollar. So obviously the amount is very huge, So we are trying to mobilize the resources domestically and internationally. But obviously, if you consider the mitigation costing that we planned for up to 2030, it is obviously less than the adaptation, the costing.
Can I, building on that, can I ask you a question? Just listening to this, it's interesting because I think, talking about just transition, are we, coming back to even issues like heat, are we doing enough joined up thinking and holistic thinking as an industry? And I'm thinking Bangladesh here, but the whole industry and therefore how that affects economic policy and whatever, around a lot of brands, I'll give you an example, a lot of brands are committed to decarbonisation, science-based targets. Are we really doing enough connection and case studies and work on how decarbonising links to potential adaptation, links to what those impacts might be? And I say that, I have one really small example. There was a piece of research done by Good Business Lab about a switching from LED light to LED lighting. And when they did the switch, electricity consumption dropped by 85%. Heat in the factory dropped by 2.5 degrees. And they actually got a 3% increase in productivity. And that's in a small case study, but that kind of thinking on a bigger industry scale, I'm asking you as the sort of professor on our panel, do you think there's enough work on that to help us as an industry address these issues?
So, one of the big changes that we are seeing today is the relationship between buyers, the global brands, and suppliers who supply them. Now, this relationship, as all of you know, is historically been quite adversarial. It has been very cost-based. The brands consistently squeeze the supplier on the price, right? And so it has not been a partnership. It has been adversarial. What we are seeing now in several industries that are allied, and in garments as well, but not necessarily in Bangladesh, we are seeing brands commit to long-term relationships, guaranteeing orders for at least 3 to 4 to 5 years. And not only that, in some cases, they are guaranteeing profitability. Into the price negotiations, 3% or 7% is being guaranteed. And I have data from global brands and from suppliers to show that that's happening. What does that mean? It really means that that relationship is being shifted from one of speed dating where you order this year and don't order the next year, to one of commitment where you order, and that is a partnership agreement. So when you shift from adversarial tactics to partnership agreements where you commit that you will source for the next several years, then it's possible for brands and their suppliers to work together. And so that movement we are seeing amongst leading brands and some leading suppliers, but maybe 10%, not, the 80% still has to come up. When that happens, the cost, the cost, etc., is so transparent that people can work together to sort of focus on adaptation. But until that happens, it's not likely, in my view. Yes?
Can I come in?
Sure.
I think both your points, should ask everyone in the room, particularly from the brands, to look at a much bigger thing, which would be beyond our canvas. We have accepted responsible business conduct, RBC. Quite often we try to shy away from that. But the points that you are making in your conversation, do you realize, basically connecting to what Zia is saying, we are talking of getting manufacturing right, manufacturing sustainable, manufacturing right in sense. But manufacturing on its own doesn't stand. Manufacturing has to come in the intersection of urbanization, what you said, imminently, but also securing biodiversity / natural capital. Quite often, when we conduct ourselves, the actors, we tend to push it aside. And that's why I said that valuing water is increasingly critical. And actually, Roger actually told me a decade back. So I think this is not to ask for observation, but this is a thing that we need to build on further. Responsible business conduct and climate action in the intersection of manufacturing, urbanization, and natural capital. It may be beyond this conversation, but this is something that we really need to take beyond this room, beyond Dhaka, to the global stage, particularly to OECD, and also because if European Union is talking about a Green Deal, under President Ursula in particular, I think this is a very fair point that we need to take as much as for Bangladesh, because if you talk of circularity and net zero, how can it work if it only, the demand side is going exponentially, whereas the supply side is lagging behind?
Just one point I like to share with everybody, that in terms of the individual contribution from industry sector, I feel that we have been promoting the resource efficiency and the recycling, the circular economy, but they have to implement them in the premises. For instance, in terms of adaptation, mitigation, co-benefits, the greening can do that. If you go for wider plantation, they can contribute to both adaptation and mitigation. And in terms of, and in Bangladesh, in urban setting, including Dhaka, we are now struggling with the groundwater depletion. The groundwater is being depleted to a very rapid pace. So we have to control this, the over extraction of groundwater. So water recycling is an important issue, and we can capture the rainwater during monsoon. We get a great deal of rains, a huge amount of rains. So we can capture the rainwater, then we can use this in the industrial process. At the same time, we can use this, if you don't want to use this in our process, we can recharge the water to the ground so that the groundwater depletion cannot happen. So there are a few areas, and in terms of, since I am also looking after the Montreal Protocol, the other issues, so in terms of the cooling demand in the industries, we can reduce the cooling demand by applying the natural refrigerant and green building, the approaches, the ideas, and we already know that 20% of the energy is being consumed by rack sector, refrigeration and air conditioning. So we have to consider both in the industrial sector how we can reduce the cooling demand by exploring some ideas, as well as the ACs. There are ACs, air conditioning appliance, energy efficient, and they are using the natural refrigerant, which have no high global warming potential. They are very less global warming potential gas. They can use in the ACs and refrigerations, and we should promote them by procuring those appliances in the industrial factory. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. I would like to add a footnote to my colleagues here. So one issue raised during our discussion about the dearth of data. So the big facilities like the industries and five-star hotels. So one thing we must consider about energy auditing, which is missing. Once you mandatorily apply energy auditing in Bangladesh, then you will get to know the exact energy data, and you can figure out the loopholes where energy is wasted and where you can save energy. So this is one important area for the industry and also other big facilities. The government has recently framed energy efficiency and conservation rules, wherein there are some facilities or consumers are labeled as designated consumer. They must mandatorily get their facilities audited, number one. They will also engage energy manager in their facilities so that they can collect data and report to the Sustainable and Renewable Energy Development Authority. Only analyzing that data, they can precisely comment where precise energy is wasted, where the scope for energy saving is there. That's how we can also save energy.
Okay. In order to, as a question for you, Ria, since you brought it up first about the connection between urbanization and all of this, I'm just wondering, how do we, when we talk about these transitions...
Reconcile.
Sorry?
How do you reconcile?
No, I don't want to reconcile. That's too difficult. I want to, how do we bring on board the informal sector? Because they play a key role in waste. They play a key role in so many other recycling and so on and so forth. So as far as the ready-made garment industry, we're talking about circularity and all of that. But much of that is happening in the informal sector. So how can we bring worry about them too?
You're tempting me to tickle many elephants. One elephant is that, can you tell me how much of, what is the urban population of Bangladesh right now?
Yeah,
40% plus.
Okay.
And the estimate coming from UN Habitat says by 2030, for everyone in the room, please give a break. is going to be 48%, half of the population. And Mr. Fahim Mashroor, the data manager, please listen to me. Its projection says by 2040, nearly 2/3 of our population. Do we understand the implication of that? That would imminently connect to your presentation. So now, coming back to your question, it's a long shot, but I think in the short while, I think as much as the manufacturers, but also that when we have conscious consumers, in the middle of the brands, in the middle of also the labor, I think we need a new kind of compact and conversation. It's not a one conversation, it has to be a conversations where we need to understand that we need to break down what is shared prosperity. What shared prosperity? I think someone said about that when the worker returns to his or her family at night, that if he finds that children are stressed, heat stressed, and these things need to be really broken down in fact. And I would again go back to data because I think we have not understood data as yet in terms of how data. I will bring data in the sense that let us bring another layer where we bring in youth in the middle of the manufacturers and the brands and others and say that you make business and then you help us. So it's both ways. I think that way we can possibly make rapid progress. That's what my take for now.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Can I say on that from a Cascale perspective? Because one of the reasons for me being on this trip in Asia for a month is really to listen and hear. And I think one of the things that's interesting from a Cascale perspective, I don't know if you know, but we represent probably about 45% of the whole industry. We actually, through the tools we have a lot of data. And I think that data then connected with other data, facility data across the industry globally. We have that specifically in Bangladesh. I think we could actually play a role in bringing that data together. I think in that role as well, we could also do something about bringing those different actors in the supply chain together, because I think that is absolutely critical. For me, fundamentally, I'm looking from the business opportunity perspective. Unless we change the dialogue and the people we're talking to in the businesses and have them be presented with this data, presented with these cases and shown what the risks are, the opportunities are, I don't think we're going to shift the behavior and the practices that we need to.
Just to chip in, we are already a service economy. Maybe much of it is informal economy. Service economy almost 70%. But I often say, and please excuse me if I say that we are often obsessed, we are so much attached to manufacturing. But real manufacturing as such, industrial manufacturing is actually shrinking. This is the nature of the economy. But the issue should be that that's why I'm increasingly harping on data, because we have not understood what will be this new service economy where Bangladesh would come, where already we are having informal economy. So that's why I think these are new nodes that we need to connect and understand much deeper.
And that requires looking beyond one industry to development policy in a big way. So we started this very narrow focus on adaptation in the garment industry, but see where we have gone. We have gone way beyond that to policy, to international trade, but most importantly to the informal sector. So it's hard to wrap all of this up in one simple sentence, so I will not try, but thank you panelists for your interventions. I enjoyed that. Thank you.